Okay, well, I gave the apprentice some instructions and he got a bit grinder happy. So now we have a bit of clearance for this motor. Yeah, a lot of you might be going, oh wow, you've massacred a classic, blah blah blah. I don't care. Alright, so in order to fit this motor correctly, we need a lot of clearance, and on top of that, because this body is on top of a chassis, it doesn't matter what we cut on the body. It just, well, I'm going to make it look neat anyway. And, the main thing is that the motor fits, and we have all the clearance everywhere, and it doesn't hit anything because we're trying to build a nice car, after everything. So, all this stuff that you see gone has no bearing or impact on the structural integrity of the vehicle at all, and it'll all be made pretty again. These are preliminary cuts after all, so it's just first cut clearance. There's a bit of sharp bits here and there, but we can clean those up. It's only sheet metal after all, and when we're done, you will never ever know the difference. And to be honest, it'll be a fair bit nicer than what was there before. If you've seen the first video where I revealed all the bashing in here and the bashing in here and the bashing here and the bashing there and the bashing, you get the idea. This body was already pretty massacred. So coming in here, I had to relieve this piece and this piece to fit the gearbox, because the gearbox is quite wide at the back. Thinking of sort of straightening this out, but I'm not too keen on that. I'd rather have an adjustment for the driver's seat. As you can see, the seat retainer bolt is there, and I'd rather be able to move the seat backwards and forwards and retain that adjustability than to make it look nice where no one's ever going to see it. It's far more important, and sometimes with these things you've got to think of your priorities and what you want to actually achieve. So down here, actually this is the passenger footwell. Down here in this corner, a little bit is going to be taken away, and we're going to lose this gusset, which is not an original gusset to begin with. And we're actually going to run the exhaust through there and box this back up. Now the advantage to that is that, the exhaust will have a place to run, because that's one of the big things that I had worried about, was the exhaust not being able to run anywhere, and it was going to be quite a challenge to get the exhaust through here. But the standard Jimny exhaust manifold, the cat sits about here, and the exhaust points straight towards that little quadrant there, which is quite nice. It means we can get the motor a little bit further back, which is really, really nice. So I've done some test fitting with the motor already. People who follow our Facebook page will have seen the motor sitting in there. It looks like, from the quick fittings I've done, is so that here's essentially the strut towers, and the motor sits back here, the crank pulley. So this car will essentially end up being, technically a mid-mount. On the standard car, you see this little relief here. This is actually so that the crank pulley would fit. So we'll actually have an engine that's lighter and further back in the car than was before. So again, this is another point for improvement over the standard layout. So we're on track to do positive things, the next thing is to get cracking on it. So as far as engine mounts go, I've chosen to use these Land Rover Discovery engine mounts. They're quite good. I mean, you can see my hand for scale. They're quite good, quite cheap. They're only about $20 Australian each mount. And they're readily available, very universal. I'll be able to use these in a few different ways. I'm going to mount one pretty much on either side of the motor, facing directly down, or I might put a little bit of angle on it to assist with anti-rocking. As far as gearbox mounts go, got these really cool guys. When I was sporadically into my BMWs, I came across these. These are standard gearbox mounts for a E46 and through a few different versions, and these are also really cheap. I think they're about 12 to 13, maybe $14 Australian for these brand new original OEM mounts, and these will be for the gearbox mounts, and just like the motor mounts, they'll be there and there, but alongside the gearbox. I have like an interesting solution for these. I've been doing a bit of design work, and I think I can get everything to fit inside the tunnel and nothing below the chassis, but I'm going to give it a good go anyway. Just going to make some more clearances, and then I'll show you what the motor looks like when it's mounted in the vehicle. Alright, I'm just doing a bit of the wiring here. I was under the assumption that this was all sort of duct tape, but it seems like the wires are in really good condition underneath, which is what I was really hoping for. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pull the wiring through this hole here so I can assess the harness, and we're going to rewrap the harness in something more modern. But yeah, the wiring looks in really good condition, and it's not duct tape, so it's got the original wiring systems label on it as well, which hopefully I'll be able to reinstate, and yeah, we'll have a pretty neat harness. But I'm just working on pulling this through. It's just like a load of stuff. I'm labeling sort of things as I go. So windscreen washer that was like inside, and another harness that goes through the harness outside and inside, and all that sort of jazz. And talk about dramas, I'll tell you what. See that? And that hidden in the harness? Yeah, this is why you gotta pull stuff apart and make sure that it's good instead of just making assumptions. And would have been rubbing on something, and that one there is one of the power feeds. You can see where it's sort of melted and corroded. That means it would have been arcing out, rubbing alongside at least something. So onwards and upwards. Okay, so before I test fit this motor, I'll just put some 20mm thick wood around this cross member so that the way the sump has been modified, I can just sit this motor on there and push it all the way back against it, and then I'll actually have clearance, and this motor can just sit where it natively wants to be, and the sump will cause the motor to be level. It's already done those calculations, and I can build the engine mounts from there. So I've left these ones in. Where are they? There they are. Now I've left these ones in for now, just to see if they're going to be any good, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to be, and I'm pretty sure I've got a better idea, and I think I'm going to have a really good idea on how to mount this motor. So I've just dropped the motor in for a bit of test fitting, and put this guy away. You can see where the standard shifter sort of thing comes out. I'm going to have to make an assembly to get the shifter out, but it looks like the standard Jimny shifter is not going to work for us. So, yeah, no, I just got to make something. I've got a few ideas already. This huge cutout is because there was some really, really bad stuff going on there, and I just chose to cut it out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to incorporate the boot into a plate that's going to cover that whole thing, so it'll wrap around, and when I put the nutserts in, it'll fit down like a factory car. Now here you can see the relief that was needed to be made for the gearbox to fit. It's not really that drastic when you really consider you know, how much we could have taken out, but the other side is considerably a different story. Where this sort of guy cuts in, the detent ball for the shifter just wasn't going to fit unless I started modifying the gearbox, and that's not what we really want to do. We got pretty much free reign to modify this guy body wise, so we'll just run with that. So the next job's going to be engine mounts. But first I'll show you the bonnet clearance. So I'm just going to throw the bonnet on like magic, and just going to have a bit of a look-see. And so yeah, as you can see, I've got about 25mm clearance in here, which is more than adequate, and I might even raise the motor up a tiny bit on my mounts. And yeah, I'm pretty stoked I could get it this low. The reason I would move the motor upwards is to get a bit more capacity in the sump. I would be really stoked if I could get a bit more capacity out of it. Now I'm going to see if the alternator fits after I put the motor into the center of the engine bay. And yeah, it's slowly moving along. Pretty stoked so far. Everything's sort of, well, really not that hard, but I suppose it's not really that hard when you're allowed to cut anything you want, pretty much. I have tidied up this guy here. I've just rebonded that, and we'll flush it off. There was some really nasty stuff welded to that before, and it required hacking it off. So we sort of just took it off, and yeah, we'll just clean it up and make it look nice later on. So here's the exhaust manifold I was referring to. This is from a 03 Jimny, obviously M series Jimny. So those, it's a bit of a logger fold. It's pretty much what I was going to build. And yeah, standard catalytic converter, which is what we need for emissions. I'm going to have to, however, change this spot here. This is for the oxygen sensor. So I'm just going to move that to here and make it look like a sort of factory one. And yeah, the exhaust is going to go straight down there. It should work really well because our chassis rail, so when it comes out of there, you can run alongside the chassis rail and down to the back there. Okay, so you know how people say don't really count your chickens. Well, I don't know how lucky I've got. So these are the Land Rover mounts. This is actually a standard Jimny engine mount for the driver's side. All I did was beat it up a little bit, and it's like sat in this position. Now this is the factory mounting points for the engine mount, but I've drilled out a hole here for the Land Rover mount to go in the center. Not only does it look a bit nicer, but it actually from all of my sort of measurements and stuff that I took on my references, it's actually looks like it's gonna work. So while I'm on a bonus, I'm just gonna roll with this for a while. Now the other side, tiny bit more complicated. So this engine mount fit down here before, so these two bolt holes here were a bit closer together. So I sort of just squished this one. As you can see, it's a little bit sort of bent there. I'm overgrown with curiosity to why this is actually working. This is pretty unreal. So on this side, I need it to be higher and closer into the block. And lo and behold, yeah, I don't understand like what's going on. Anyway, that's a win. I'm going to take it if it's there, and I'm going to move on to the gearbox mounts. Now at the back of the gearbox, I've made this little box section out of a few pieces, and sort of just basic welded it together. This is still rough, so it's not final product. So I had to make it really slim because the tunnel really narrows down here. And I just use these for bolts. They're usually for the shifter assembly, but because I'm not going to be using that system, I've got to make something else. I may as well use them to hold the gearbox up. And here we can see my nice little BMW mounts. Now, I was smart enough to measure, and this is very planned, this setup. I know the height of the gearbox against the chassis, so this is all based off of reference images. So hopefully that'll be good. The next part will be getting the motor and trans back together and slotting it in, and I'll probably, I don't know which end to start off with. Probably the back, because it's the easiest. but I'm going to need a bit of equipment for that. But yeah, all good and full steam ahead.